If you work wildlife nights out by County Road 7 and find a jackalope, don't pet it. That sounds like the kind of advice drunks make up at the pump by the feed store. And for most of my life, I would have said exactly that. I was still on that desert service road at 11:43 p.m. because the clinic wanted $640 by 9 the next morning, and the steering wheel had gone slick with cold under my gloves. So I was in no mood for folklore when the thing stepped into my headlights. The rabbit part came first. Ears, haunches, that stop and freeze look they all get when the beam hits. Then the antlers caught the light, not branching wide like some novelty postcard. Just two pale hooks close to the skull, neat and wrong. The thermal unit hanging from my neck gave one dead little buzz, and my first thought was cheap battery, not monster, which is what made me slow down instead of driving past. That was my bad habit from security. I double-tapped every latch, checked every screen twice, trusted systems longer than I trusted people. 2 years ago, at a warehouse fire west of Pueblo, I followed the panel instead of the cleaner, pounding on the stair door because the panel said the stairwell was clear. He lived. He never came back to work. I took this job after that because animals, at least, weren't supposed to lie. The route out there ran past an empty trailhead kiosk, a shuttered gift shed, and the long concrete wash pen we called J7 because somebody had painted the letter and number on the outer post before I got hired. The mark was half sanded off, but it still showed through the dust. I noticed it because I noticed labels. It didn't register then that the antlers made the same shape. My truck carried the usual junk that turns into your life if you do enough night calls. Catch pole behind the seat, old bike gloves tucked under the printer cradle, thermal around my neck from a government auction, flashlight clipped to the door pocket with teeth marks from my own bad habit of holding it while I worked. The printer sat beside the radio and spat thin strips of transcript every time dispatch logged a call. It jammed in dry weather and behaved in humidity, which was backwards. But that desert kept a man humble. The old handler met me at the second gate because he always beat me there. He moved with that stingy economy older field guys have, no wasted reach, no extra step, one hand already on the chain before the truck settled. The first thing he did was look past me at the shoulder and say, "Window up? It looks like a rabbit." "Then don't pet it." I laughed once because I thought he was trying to spook me. He didn't laugh back. "Don't say your name near it either." "Why?" "Because I said so." That was the end of it. He shut the chain, slapped the side of my truck twice, and walked toward the wash pen with his own light held low. The smell coming off the creosote ditch was sharp and wet, so when I rolled forward and saw tail lights stopped ahead of me, I thought, roadkill, stranded tourist, maybe a drunk from the cabins. I did not think the rule was about to matter. The rental crossover was half on the shoulder, half in the dust. Driver door open. Hazard lights ticking. A woman in a puffer jacket stood crouched in my beams with both hands out, making that soft coaxing sound adults use when they want an animal to prove the world is kinder than it is. The jackalope sat 3 feet from her boots, like it had been waiting for applause. "Ma'am," I called, already out of the truck. "Back away from it." She glanced over one shoulder. "It's hurt." The old handler came up on my right and said, "Flat as gravel. Leave it be." She reached anyway. People think petting is the gentlest thing they can do. That's what makes it dangerous. Her glove brushed the fur between the antlers, one slow stroke, and the animal moved so fast the eye turned it into a smear. It didn't bite. It clamped. Those antlers folded in against her sleeve and locked around her wrist with a sound like a carabiner snapping shut. She gasped, not screamed, which made it worse, and the rabbit hung there for one impossible second as if her pulse had become a handle. Then it dropped, still attached, and the pressure on her arm made her knees buckle. I heard myself say, "Easy, easy," because that's what you say when you want somebody calm. The old handler swore under his breath. Don't comfort it. I should have listened. Instead, I went in with the bite gloves, because she was a paying guest and an adult in shock, and the clinic did not get to own the last decent part of me. I slid one hand under her forearm, got the catch pole around the jackalope's middle, and twisted. The fur felt warm. The antlers felt refrigerator cold. When they let go, they left a white crescent on her jacket cuff, neat as frost. My radio cracked against the printer dock at the same time. I grabbed the mic and called it in. "Wildlife contact on Service Road north of the cabins," I said. "Adult female, non-bleeding arm injury. Need med cart and supervisor." The printer coughed out the strip while I was still talking. The old handler tore it free, looked once, and handed it to me without a word. It didn't say wildlife contact. It said asset transfer. The paper shook in my glove. "No, that's the speech line. It garbles." The woman pressed her free hand against the white mark on her sleeve and said, "What does that mean?" "It means the printer's old." It wasn't a good lie, but it got her moving, which is why I used it. I walked her toward my truck, because the cab heater was running and the old handler caught my elbow hard enough to stop me. Not the cab. She needs heat. Not the cab. There are moments when doing the kind thing and doing the smart thing split clean apart in front of you. I still hate how fast I picked kindness. I opened the passenger door and helped her up. The rabbit wasn't in the road anymore. It was under the truck. I saw that in the mirror as I climbed behind the wheel. Two pale antler tips, tucked up where the step rail cast shadow. Not moving with the chassis, moving with us. The rear camera indicator over the dash monitor was dark, which meant the camera was off. The screen still woke up on its own and showed the thing running under the truck in perfect step with us, one frame behind real time. That was when my skepticism cracked. Not from fear, from evidence. Anyone who's worked nights long enough learns there are certain mistakes machines don't make by accident. A dead camera doesn't give you delayed footage. A transcript engine doesn't turn contact into transfer unless somebody trained it to. The old handler saw my face, saw what was on the screen, and yanked the passenger door back open before I could shift into drive. It came up at him from the dark below the seat, not leaping high, just enough. He jerked back. The antlers hit the bite glove on his left hand and scraped down with a dry plastic sound that raised every hair on my neck. He slammed the door. The woman made a thin animal noise I felt in my teeth. "J7, he said. "Now." That was the first real resource we lost. Not blood, not bullets, the cab. Once something gets into the cab on a field road, the truck stops being shelter and turns into bait. I drove anyway because the wash pen was 30 seconds north, and there was nowhere else to put her. The printer spat another strip while I was turning. "Escort one handler to J7. I didn't say handler. The old handler kept watching the floorboard. "It heard you calm her down." "What?" "It heard you claim it." That sounded insane, and I would have said so if the thing hadn't lifted its head from behind the center console right then. I only saw half of it in the monitor bloom. Fur, one black eye. Antlers folded too close, like fingers waiting to open. Then it dropped out of frame, and the monitor froze on an empty seat. Friendly is how it asks permission. That line has lived in my head ever since because I didn't think it then. I thought it later after I watched the footage back, after I heard my own voice telling her easy. At the time, all I knew was the old handler had gone pale under his dust, and the woman in the passenger seat wouldn't stop staring at her cuff. We hit the wash pen gate and I jumped out with the chain key. J7 was built for injured deer and the occasional mountain lion cub. Concrete walls chest high on me. Steel roof. Sliding inner gate. The old handler shoved the woman inside the service room attached to it while I swung the outer panel closed. The rabbit stayed in the truck. I knew that because I heard it moving under the dash, a soft paper-dry scritch. And then all the background sound cut at once. No heater fan, no insects, no radio hash. Silence doesn't fade in the desert at night. It gets switched off. I stood there with the chain in my hand and felt the absence press against my eardrums. And that forced the next decision. I left the truck where it was and went for the service room because the woman was alone in there. And my body had already decided who I was protecting. The room smelled like bleach and old hay. She was sitting on the counter with her sleeve rolled up. No puncture. Just a ring of pale skin where the antlers had clamped. The exact width of a man's thumb and forefinger. The old handler stood in the doorway, watching the truck through the window in the door. "It isn't a bite," she said, "so why does my hand feel numb?" Because that would have been an explanation, and explanations were the one thing nobody gave out there. I took the laminated card from the visor where I kept it, and finally read it all the way through. Wildlife. Contact. Revision. J7, that was the admin line printed along the bottom under a coffee ring. 3 short rules showed above it. Don't pet it. If contact occurs, let it settle. If dispatch prints escort, secure J7 and wait. The second line had a smear through the first 2 words. I saw let it settle because that was what the ink looked like under the room light. The old handler saw it over my shoulder and made a sound like he wanted to spit. That line changed. "You've seen it before?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed at the woman. "Ask her what she called it." She blinked at both of us. "What?" "When you touched it." She swallowed. I said, "Hey, sweet thing." The old handler looked at me. "There." That still wasn't enough. Not for me. I needed something harder than folklore and old men and a misprinted card, so I ran a test. I keyed the radio and kept my voice flat. "Dispatch. Confirm medcart to J7. Animal secured outside. Repeat. Animal outside." The printer answered before dispatch did. The strip curled hot into my hand. Handler secured inside. The room went colder than the night outside. Not air cold, object cold. The metal counter under the woman's hand threw off the same hard chill I'd felt in the antlers, and she snatched her palm back with a hiss. The old handler said, "Now you believe me." I did. The bad part was I believed the wrong version first. I thought the system was mislabeling the victim as the animal because of some old containment language in the printer feed. Bug, cover-up, legacy code, whatever, let me stay in the world I understood. It didn't register until later that every changed word pushed the same direction. Not misheard, reassigned. The old handler left me with her and went to kill the truck power at the battery box. He shouldn't have, and I shouldn't have let him. But the rear camera was still flickering on and off with the engine dead, and the monitor glow was turning the service room window into a mirror. He said, "Keep the door shut." And I said, 30 seconds. And that was the last simple thing either of us said. The woman was trying not to cry, because adults apologize for panic, even when they're the one in pain. She looked at the white ring on her wrist and asked, "Is it poison?" "No." "Then what is it?" A question like that can split you. Truth buys terror. A lie buys movement. I was already failing her, so I chose movement. "Get the sink running," I said. "Cold water. Keep your eyes off the glass." She stared at me. "Why?" "Because I need you doing something." That worked. Shame does that. Give people a task and they can outrun fear for 10 seconds. She turned to the sink. I used those 10 seconds to look through the service room drawer for old incident slips, and the printer jammed in the truck outside with a hard little chirp. Same half line showing through the feed window over and over like a mouth learning one sentence. Do not let it settle. The smear on the card hadn't hidden let. It had hidden do not. The trap rule wasn't a rule at all. It was damage. And I'd already obeyed it. I'd calmed the victim. I had seated her in the cab. I had given the thing time to decide where it belonged. Somebody pounded once on the outer steel. The old handler's voice came through the door. "Open up." The woman turned. I grabbed her arm before she could move. He knocked again. "Open up." Then the radio on my belt, dead a minute ago, spoke in his voice from the speaker grill. "Open up." That was the moment the human explanation died. No bug copies a man's breath. No legacy printer learns tone. Something outside had the old handler's voice and wanted the door more than it wanted either of us calm. The woman whispered, "Is he hurt?" I had to choose between policy and an adult on the other side of a steel door. Leave him out there and maybe keep her alive. Open up and maybe kill all three of us. That's the part people argue about after the fact. Like there was a clean answer hidden somewhere in the paperwork. I broke the lock, not all the way. I popped the inner latch, cracked the steel 2 inches, kept my boot against it, and called, "Say the last thing you told me." Silence. Then, from the radio and the gap at the same time, "Open up." The old handler never repeated himself when he didn't have to. That saved us. I slammed the door and threw the inner bar across just as something hit the metal low. Not human shoulder height, lower, faster. The bar jumped in its brackets. The woman choked on a sob. Outside, the truck horn gave 2 short blasts on its own. Don't honk twice. That wasn't on the card. That was the old handler's second rule, the one he'd muttered when we first got out there. And I barely held on to because it sounded too stupid to matter. The horn answered itself from farther away the next second. Not from the truck, but from beyond the pen, like the sound had moved. I remembered what he said. I opened the rear vent instead of the door and shouted, "Say my catchphrase." It was a dumb little thing I used on nuisance calls, something I said to myself more than anybody else. Leave it be. 3 words. Boring enough to be mine. Outside, in my voice, something said, "Easy, easy." Not him, not me. That was the proof I needed and the worst one to get. The woman sagged against the sink. "What does it want?" "Custody." The word came out before I could dress it up. Once I said it, the whole night snapped into shape around it. Petting wasn't affection, it was acceptance. Comforting it wasn't kindness. It was transfer language, the same way a handoff at a kennel or a clinic uses calm voice and direct contact. The printer hadn't been failing, it had been documenting. I made the next choice because the old handler was still out there somewhere. And because repeating an old failure in a prettier building is still repeating it. I took the bite gloves, the catch pole, and the folded horse blanket from the shelf by the pen wash valve. The blanket was older than me, smelled like wet dust, and had one torn grommet where a mule had kicked through it years ago. We used it to blind nervous animals. I'd never liked it. That was why I trusted it now. "What are you doing?" the woman asked. "Transferring it." She stared like I'd lost my mind. "Listen to me." I crouched, so she had to look at my face and not the door. "When I open this, you stay by the drain and count to 30 out loud. If you stop, it comes back in here. If you hear my voice asking you to open up, you keep counting." Her lips shook, but she nodded. "Adults will take impossible instructions if you make them specific enough." The outer yard light kicked on by itself when I lifted the bar, not bright. Sodium yellow, flat and ugly, enough to show the truck parked crooked by the gate, and the old handler on one knee beside the battery box, breathing, alive. Something small sat on the truck hood between us, backlit so the antlers looked like bent wire. That was the clearest I ever saw it until the end. Rabbit body, yes, but too long through the shoulders and too deliberate in the way it placed its forepaws. Not hopping, stepping. The face didn't read wrong until it turned profile. Then the mouth split farther than a rabbit's mouth had any right to split. Not in a grin, just in preparation. As if it meant to take hold of something larger than itself. The old handler said very softly, "Don't do this." "Got another plan?" He looked past me at the service room where the woman had started counting. The number 9 trembled through the vent. The old handler closed his eyes once. That was answer enough. I dropped the blanket over the thing, and it went still for half a heartbeat. The catch pole pinned the bundle to the hood, and I did the one thing the card and the old handler and common sense had all told me not to do. I set my gloved hand on the shape under the blanket and stroked once between the folded antlers. Warm fur. Then that refrigerator cold click. The pressure hit my wrist through the glove, not painful at first, just certain. The blanket writhed. The old handler moved, but I barked, "Gate," because if he tried to help, it would pick him next, and he knew that as fast as I did. He ran for the washpen chain while I backed toward the inner cage with the jackalope clamped to my arm under the blanket like a live trap I'd chosen to carry. Every step cost something. Time, because the woman was still counting and getting near 30. Access, because my truck door locks started snapping open and shut behind me as if the system couldn't decide who belonged to whom. Evidence, because the printer in the cab spat every strip it had, and the wind took half of them across the yard. Safe space, because the service room door swung inward 2 inches on its own, and I had to kick it closed without taking my hand off the blanket. The old handler got the inner cage open. J7 was never meant for something that understood doors, but concrete is still concrete. I dragged the thing in, twisted the catch pole free, and felt the antlers tighten hard enough to numb my fingers, clear to the elbow. "Now," I said. He slammed the gate. The sound inside that cage wasn't animal. It was a dozen dry office noises packed into one throat. Printer chatter, paper tear, radio click. Then my own voice from under the blanket, calm as a training video, saying, "Easy." The old handler threw the bolt. I pulled my arm back, and the antlers let go all at once. The blanket dropped flat. Nothing moved for one whole second. Then the fabric rose from underneath, not with a body standing, but with those antlers lifting it in 2 patient points. And the cage light above J7 blew out in a shower of dead glass that never touched the ground, because the darkness swallowed it first. The old handler grabbed my jacket and hauled me backward. We got the outer chain across as the thing hit the steel from inside, low and fast, once, then again. And then it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The woman reached 30 from the service room vent and kept going because fear had turned counting into prayer. 31. 32. I told her she could stop only when the old handler slid the inspection mirror under the cage door, and both of us saw the same thing on the concrete. The blanket, the bite glove. 2 bent grooves in the dust, shaped like the J and the slash of a 7. No rabbit. No break in the cage either. The chain held. The inner bolt held. The inspection mirror showed empty floor until it tilted just enough to catch the back wall, and then the antlers were there in reflection only, folded close, waiting behind empty space. We didn't open it again. We got the woman to the county road by dawn and transferred her to the med unit at the gas station lot because I wasn't bringing official people past that second gate if I could help it. The white ring on her wrist had faded to almost nothing by then, but every time somebody asked what happened, she started to say rabbit and stopped on the first syllable, like the word had changed shape in her mouth. I filed everything before sunrise, because constructive action is all that keeps a night like that from owning the rest of your life. I taped the good transcript strips to a plain statement. I wrote the rule correctly this time. Don't pet it. If it clamps, don't comfort it. If the print says, escort, secure J7 and do not open for a familiar voice. The old handler signed nothing, which was smart, but he stood behind me while I fed the pages through the county fax at the station store. I thought sealing the cage and logging the warning would be enough. It was almost enough. We prevented the woman from taking it home. We kept the med unit from driving onto preserved property. We put a chain and a corrected rule between that thing and the next idiot with soft hands. What I can't get past is the last strip the truck printer gave me after sunrise, when the engine was off and the paper tray was empty, and the monitor had finally gone black. It didn't use my call sign. It didn't use my name. It just printed one line in the same bad block letters as the others. Transfer acknowledged. Hold for next route. A week later, I found the same J7 revision mark on a ferry quarantine memo, 3 states away, stamped with a department I'd never worked for, and the note at the bottom said, "If you've seen that symbol before, don't ignore it." I keep asking myself whether I trapped it or just accepted the handoff. All I know is this. Out there, friendly is how it asks permission. Leave it be.